This week we're looking at equity and diversity. People often believe in mathematics that people are successful because they have a mathematical brain. Um, I'd like to try and challenge that view if you hold that view. My view is that all students can learn mathematics provided they have good teachers to foster that environment for them. And there's plenty of examples of people who've come from the wrong side of the tracks who have been very successful in mathematics. So clearly it's not something that's innate. It's something to do with our teaching that means that some students can be successful and some students can't or won't be successful. Hattie's work, as we talked about in previous weeks, Hattie's work shows that the teacher is the most important person in creating success for students. So in terms of equity and diversity, the teacher is critical at enabling students access to mathematics. So that's what this module will be about. First of all, I want you to get clear the difference between equity and equality. These are two very, very different concepts, and a lot of it depends where you're sitting on a political continuum as to which way you might sit. So equity actually means that we treat students unequally to get equal outcomes. A classic example of this is some people believe and some people challenge the amount of money that might be being spent or directed towards Indigenous students. Now, we put a lot more money in or invest a lot more money into the education of Indigenous students because our goal is for Indigenous students to achieve in school mathematics and in school in general on par with the mainstream population. We know that the equity outcomes for Indigenous people is one of the worst in the Australian educational landscape. We also know from our international studies that Australia has the worst tail for equity of all OECD countries. So we're doing something in this country that is marginalising our students from equity target groups. So with inequity, what we want to do is treat students unequally so that at the end of their schooling, they're all going to come out pretty much on par. The other part of when we're talking about equity is the equality debate, and that means that all students are given a fair and equal treatment so that all students are treated equally. Every student has a quota, whatever that might be. Let's say it's $5,000 a year. That's fair because every student is given the same amount of money to have education. They all have equivalent money being spent on them, so therefore what should happen is that's an equal treatment, so we would be expecting something similar at the end. But the outcome of an equality approach is that we treat all students equally, but what really happens is we get an unequal outcome. So we might spend $5,000, whatever the amount is, on a student who comes from a very wealthy family, who lives in the leafy green suburbs, and we also spend $5,000 on an Aboriginal student who lives in a remote Indigenous community, and we expect that then we'll have equal outcomes. The reality is the outcomes are far from equal. So it depends which side of the fence that you're sitting on. It depends which one of those two ends of the continuum that you would be thinking about in terms of equity and equality. Now, what we do have in maths education and in education generally, we have some clear equity target groups. These include students from low SES backgrounds, students who live in rural areas, students who live in rural and remote areas. We have our Indigenous students, our Indigenous Australian students, our First Nation people. We have students whose language background isn't English. And when I say English, that can be English as a middle class English, because that's the English that we speak in schools. Students who have disabilities, gender is an important variable as well, and some people argue we need to look at gifted and talented students, because often by looking at the students who aren't succeeding, we're failing to cater for the needs of students who have the potential to succeed at very high levels. Now, each of those equity target groups is listed as one on its own, but we've got to look at also the intersection of equity target groups. So when we say that boys, for example, do better at mathematics than girls, we need to look at those, unpacking those groups quite differently. What we do know is that when we compound different areas of disadvantage, that can create multiple levels of disadvantage. So if we look at, for example, Indigenous students who live in remote areas, they do much more poorly than Indigenous students who live in urban contexts. So just by grouping Indigenous students together fails to account for the levels of disadvantage and marginalisation that students achieve. Similarly, if we're looking at students who are low SES, who live in rural areas, they don't perform as well as low SES students who live in urban areas. So geographical location is an important variable as well. So some students experience multiple levels of disadvantage when it comes to mathematics that we need, and generally education. So we need to recognise that students enter school with very, very different experiences. They have very, very different expectations of what will come of school, and those different backgrounds significantly impact on what they learn and what they will be able to take from the experiences that you offer as a teacher. If we think about what happens with students from low SES families, for example, a beautiful study was conducted in the 70s called Making the Difference. You may have watched the 7 Up series from the UK. Those series are actually quite poignant in pointing out the expectations of families about school, how parents feel about school, how they see the relevance of schooling. Many low SES families, for example, might be very comfortable coming into the primary school and certainly into the early years context, but less comfortable in coming to the secondary schooling area. We also need to think about how educated the parents are. Are they able to help their children at home in terms of homework? So is homework actually a good thing to do? If the parents haven't got the resources to help their children, if the children are coming home with homework that the parents can't do. All of those sorts of issues are things that we really need to think about very, very carefully in terms of equity. So what we need to do as teachers is we need to build scaffolds that will enable all of the students, and I mean all of our students, to succeed in mathematics. As a teacher, you need to seriously question your own beliefs about equity and equality. Which one of those do you subscribe to? Because it is going to impact significantly on the learning experiences that you provide for your students. What we do know is that, for example, in Indigenous education, the gap actually widens the longer the children remain at school. So we've got to question whether schooling is making any difference, or is schooling actually exacerbating that difference. I mean, I'm doing that a little tongue-in-cheek, but we really do have to be quite critical of ourselves as educators and what we're offering those students. We do know, for example, that many remote Indigenous students do quite well in grade 3, but as they remain in school, a lot of other factors start to impact on their success, their attendance, their dispositions towards schooling. And those issues really need to be addressed if we want remote Indigenous students to be successful, if we want urban low SES students to be successful, if we want refugee students to be successful. We really need to make sure we understand the nature of the problem, and this comes back to the whole assessment for learning that we've already discussed. We need to understand the nature of the issues that the students are having with schooling and with maths education, and we need to build effective scaffolds so that those students can be successful. What often happens, sadly, with mathematics is when people subscribe to that behaviourist model of maths education that we spoke about earlier in this course, is that students may have in inverted commas, gaps in their education, maths education, so teachers just keep reteaching. If you're a year 9 student and you don't understand something that happened in grade 5, and for the next 4 years you've been getting the same old of the same stuff, ask yourself, why would those students keep coming to school? They're being told consistently they're a failure, they can't do this, they're not getting anything that's new or exciting. So I would deeply question whether schooling is providing them with an educative experience that is going to want them to come to school and that is going to extend their mathematical understandings. So we need to be very critical and very circumspect about what we're offering students in terms of equity and mathematics education. One of the main areas of challenge for many students from disadvantaged background is access to the language of mathematics. Now, we talked a lot about language and mathematics earlier in the course, and it would come up, and it's come up in quite a few other areas of this course. So one of the major obstacles in success in mathematics is being able to access the language of mathematics. What we do know very much from the work of Basil Bernstein is that the language of instruction is middle class English. So if you're middle class and you're an English speaker, you've got a much higher probability of being successful in mathematics than if you do not speak English as your first language and if you are not middle class, and possibly if you want to call Australian as well, whatever that might be. So one of the biggest misconceptions that we hold as a community and as a community of educators, for example, is that low SES students, let's say from the Logan area, if you're from Queensland or from Brisbane, those students speak English. Yes, they do speak English, that is true, but they don't speak the middle class English that we have in schools. Basil Bernstein's work on the elaborated and restricted code back in the 70s highlighted the differences and the nuances of low SES or working class families as opposed to middle class families. So our students in our low SES areas also speak English, but they speak a different register of English. So we need to be acutely aware of the English that we speak and not just try to indoctrinate students into that, but build those bridges for those students to be able to gain access to the middle class register of English and also the nuances of how we interact socially, which are very much imbued with middle class values, things like turn taking, respecting the other, offering some sort of salutation to the other when they've offered something like, oh, thank you, that was really good, that's helped me understand. So there's a game that actually gets played out in our social interactions, which other students need to get access to when we're actually taking the approaches we're now doing in mathematics around group work, around problem solving, around communicating mathematically, and so forth. So part of your role now is to actually induct students into the language of mathematics, giving them access to the rich vocabulary of mathematics, the discourse of mathematics, the semiotics of mathematics, in ways that allow access to mathematics as a powerful form of knowledge. So access and success is very dependent on being able to access the register and the discourse of school mathematics. The other area in this aspect, this module, is the notion of inclusion. Inclusion often refers to those students with disabilities. You need to make yourself familiar with some of the policies around inclusion of students with disabilities. So often you'll hear the term inclusion used in a sense that is quite specifically targeting students with disabilities, and other times you'll hear people using the term inclusion to be inclusive of all social groups. So you just need to be aware of the nuances around that term inclusion. One of the ways that we cater for diversity in our classroom is through processes of differentiation. This is another practice that many departments of education are embracing because they're realising that we really do need to cater for the diversity in our classrooms. So differentiation is one way of doing that. So differentiation means creating learning experiences that may be similar. So if you're looking at the addition concept, for example, all of the students will be doing addition. However, based on your assessment for learning, you've recognised that some students are needing extension, as in going beyond what you would be teaching. So you will create learning experiences that may allow for addition of hundreds. your lesson might be about addition through regrouping in the tens, in the ones and tens. So your bulk of your lesson may be built around that, but you'll also find that from your assessment of learning, some students are still struggling with the whole concept of regrouping. So you may need to explore activities that will allow those students to do that, because if they haven't grasped the idea of regrouping, there's not much point in giving them other activities that will further reinforce that they can't do mathematics. So the differentiation means that across your classroom, it looks like all the students are doing the same activity, which in this case is about addition with regrouping, but you have created different activities targeted on the needs of those students. Now, differentiation works when you, as the teacher, have a particular set of values. If you believe in that there's a biological basis to your students' learning and some students just can't learn things, you're going to lock those students out. So you need to have a different frame of reference in terms of the students in your classroom. It is really critical for you as a teacher to believe that all students can learn mathematics, and that it's your responsibility to provide experiences that cater for the needs of those learners, and that they will scaffold the learners to go to new levels of understanding. So it's critical that you develop that belief. I want to challenge one more belief that is dominant in mathematics, and that's the notion of ability grouping. You will find in many maths classrooms, and I have to say that I go into many classrooms, and it blows me away to see ability grouping in very, very young classes. I've been into schools where they unashamedly group students by ability in the first few years of schooling. What that does mean is that it creates a whole set of practices that are counterproductive towards maths learning. So what I want to do very briefly, and we'll encounter this a lot more, but I want to raise it in this first course so that you're starting to become aware of and critical of this practice. What we know from the plethora of research that's been done around ability grouping is that 90% of maths teachers support ability grouping, but 10% of English teachers support ability grouping, which might be anticipated. The one that is always amazing is that only 10% of science teachers, which you would think science and mathematics come together, so why is it that only 10% of science teachers support ability grouping? And why is it that 90% of maths teachers support ability grouping? What the research tells us, and this is almost categorical, and I'd like to go through this in a lot more detail, but in another time. What we do know from all the work that's been done around ability grouping, I shouldn't say all, the majority of work that's been done around ability grouping, that it doesn't matter what group a student is in, whether they're in the high, middle or low group, they are disadvantaged in some way. What happens in the middle and lower groups is the students are locked out of progressing to higher levels because they're offered an impoverished curriculum. They're offered a lower level of mathematics so that they can't perform on tests that will allow them to progress into higher levels. So they're locked out of higher levels and basically locked into lower levels. It's actually psychologically damaging as well. What we do know, particularly from Joe Bowler's work, particularly in the UK and the USA, is that students in the high ability groups are often under so much pressure to achieve, and the level of work that and the amount of work that they have to do puts a lot of pressure on them. In the lower groups, what often happens is the students know they're in the lower groups, they're offered an impoverished curriculum, and they learn that they're failures in mathematics. They learn that they can't do mathematics. So they've already disengaged with mathematics. So in terms of ability grouping, that's the corpus of research in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it than that, but you've got to question whether ability grouping actually works and what the effect of it is. However, the research on heterogeneous or mixed ability grouping actually shows that it produces better outcomes for all students. The students who are higher achieving students, they work within the group. They have to explain thinking more. They become better in terms of their own metacognition because they're communicating about their mathematical reasoning, so it becomes more consolidated. The lower level students are actually experiencing mathematics through the eyes of the higher achieving students, so they can see where mathematics might go, so they're exposed to a much richer form of mathematics. So across the board, heterogeneous grouping shows that it's a much better practice for all students in terms of their learning of mathematics. So I want to finish on that note and hopefully get you to challenge some of those myths about ability grouping and what that might mean for you as a teacher as to whether you group or not group by ability. I prefer to use achievement, but the term ability is the one that's actually commonly used. So that's the last lecture for this course. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope I've been able to challenge some of your views. I hope I've been able to provoke you into thinking about new ways of teaching mathematics, and I look forward to seeing you in the next course.